I'm very excited to introduce Ty Perry. Ty is our field ministries representative with Friends of Israel. He's been serving with Friends of Israel for quite some time now, I think almost 8 years. He started off as an intern in Las Vegas. He actually started off with me in Israel on Origins. And then he went after Origins, he felt a burden to serve the Jewish people and to show and share the love of the Messiah with them. So we sent him out to Las Vegas, where he did an internship there, and he hasn't left. Okay. He's been a saint in Sin City. So I'm very excited to have Ty Perry, who is an expert on anti-Semitism. And I hope he shares why that he's an expert in this field, because it's more than just book knowledge for Ty. You're going to see it's actually something that he applies to his everyday life as well as you're learning this. So Ty Perry, take it away, my friend.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. It's really good to see you. And I'm glad that you're taking part in this class. I know, Thursday night especially in the winter for some of you here in Vegas, it's becoming a little more like spring, but it can be a little bit difficult to find time for things. But I appreciate you tuning in and being part of this class. As Chris said, I serve with the Friends of Israel out in Las Vegas, which is an interesting field, as you can imagine. But we have approximately 80,000 Jewish people here. And it's been my joy with my wife to serve the Jewish people here for about 8 years. And so this topic of anti-Semitism is kind of personal for me. We had a very good friend. He was a Holocaust survivor from Hungary. We ministered to him for about 8 years. He just passed away last month. And his story of what happened to him in Hungary at the hands of the Nazis has really impacted my life and my ministry. In fact, a lot of the people who we minister to here in Las Vegas are Holocaust survivors or the descendants of Holocaust survivors. One friend fled Belgium just a couple of years ago because of the increasing anti-Semitism in Europe. So when we think about anti-Semitism, it's good for us to think of the Holocaust and to think of historical anti-Semitism, but it's also, we must remember that anti-Semitism is a contemporary problem. And we also, on top of that, need to recognize, as we'll see over the course of these 3 classes, that anti-Semitism isn't the domain of any one ideological group or demographic. So you will find anti-Semitism in the Muslim world. You will find anti-Semitism within Catholicism and in traditional Protestant theology. And I think those are awful things, and that's regrettable. But to me, one of the things that's the most heinous is that we find anti-Semitism within the evangelical church. One of the things that I do, in addition to serving the Jewish community, is that I speak and teach in churches throughout the country. And these are churches that love the Lord, they love Israel, but what often happens, almost in every church I've spoken to, someone will come up to me after my message, and usually somewhat innocently, they will repeat some anti-Semitic rhetoric. They'll tell jokes about Jewish people that are disparaging of Jewish people, or they'll say things about how Jews have all the money and all the power and they're taking over the world and things like this. Those are anti-Semitic stereotypes. And so my hope is that by looking at anti-Semitism, past, present, and future, we as believers can be better equipped to refrain from anti-Semitism ourselves, but also to be aware of it in our local churches. So today we're going to begin with a biblical view of anti-Semitism. So let me bring up my screen here, just one moment. There we go. All right. Let me just one thing on my end. Okay. So we'll be looking at a biblical view of anti-Semitism. And I want us to consider, let's see here. I'm having trouble with my with advancing this. Let's see if it's going to do what I need it to do. Maybe not. We might have to do it this way. So we're going to begin by, first of all, defining what anti-Semitism is. So the term anti-Semitism was coined by a man named Wilhelm Marr. He was a German politician and thinker in the 1870s. Actually, in 1879 is when he coined this term. And he believed that there existed a competition between Jews and what he termed Aryans, and it was a racial competition. And it's based partly on evolutionary theory, Darwinian theory, applied to social interactions. And so he believed that this competition between Jews and Aryans could only be resolved when one had dominance of the other, which involved annihilation. Today, there's multiple definitions of anti-Semitism, and it's actually a little bit political as to how we define it. But I found that Merriam-Webster's definition is pretty good. It's hostility toward or discrimination against Jews as a religious, ethnic, or racial group. Now, you may have recently heard in the news about some comments that Whoopi Goldberg made several weeks ago. She said, they were talking about the Holocaust, I think on The View, where she's a host. And she mentioned that the Holocaust was not racial, had nothing to do with race. And she came under fire for that. And I was torn on it because I find a lot of things to disagree with Whoopi Goldberg on, but I couldn't disagree with her entirely. And there's a reason. We have to understand what it means to be Jewish. Is being Jewish a race? Well, we have to understand then what is race. Well, race is a construct that man has made up, right? And it's an unbiblical thing. We don't find races in the Bible. We find people groups, we find tribes, but we don't find terms like race. In fact, what we're told is that there are two groups of people in the world, Jews and Gentiles. So think about, for example, Romans 1:16, where Paul is talking about the gospel and how it is to go out to everyone, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek or the Gentile. So there's two groups of people. We don't find race in the Bible. So when someone says anti-Semitism is racism, or as Whoopi Goldberg said, the Holocaust wasn't about race, it's true and it's not true. So when we talk about Whoopi, let's address Whoopi Goldberg's comments. When Whoopi Goldberg said what she did, she was wrong in that being Jewish is not a race. And I just heard Dennis Prager the other day in a video addressing her comments. He did a really good job. He said, no, Jews are not a race, they're a people. There are people that we would believe as Bible-believing Christians, there are people formed by God. You cannot get away from that. But they're not a race. On the other hand, when Hitler persecuted the Jewish people, he deemed them a race. He viewed them as a race, as a racial group. Therefore, the Holocaust was racial, even though he was mistaken in labeling Jews as a race. He viewed it through racial terms. And again, he came, of course, out of this German kind of mindset of race and Darwinian evolution. It's not very nice. I probably shouldn't say it because we might have Germans like my family in the group. But Billy Sunday, the famous evangelist, he said, if you turn hell upside down, stamped on the bottom, it will say made in Germany. There's a lot of bad theology and bad ideas that come out of Germany. And unfortunately, the term, at least anti-Semitism, is one of them. So one of the questions that often comes up when we're talking about anti-Semitism is, well, it's anti-Semitic if I dislike a Jewish person? No, of course not. It's not anti-Semitic to dislike someone who's Jewish. And it is anti-Semitic when you dislike someone or you hate someone because they are Jewish. So if I get into a dispute or there's someone who's Jewish and I don't really like them, it doesn't mean I dislike them because they're Jewish. But anti-Semitism is this discrimination, dislike, or hostility against Jewish people or the Jewish people because they're Jewish. Again, I'm sorry I can't be in present mode for whatever reason. My computer doesn't want to cooperate, but we want to go on to the origins of anti-Semitism. And it's important that we understand, of course, I'm teaching this from a biblical perspective, that ultimately anti-Semitism is a result of man's wicked heart. If you remember what Jeremiah 17:9 says, that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, who can know it? Our hatred for other people comes out of our hearts. But it's also, it stems from Satan's conflict with God. So we don't have time to go through all of this, but ever since Genesis 3, when God makes a promise to Satan that there is going to come this person, this man, we now call him the Messiah, this Messiah who's going to come, who is going to crush Satan's head. Satan will bruise his heel, but this Messiah will crush his head. That Satan, from that point on, is constantly in conflict with God, trying to thwart his plans. For example, after this promise comes Cain and Abel. Cain is essentially a secular person, a man of the world. Abel is a godly man. God accepts his offerings. He doesn't accept Cain's. What happens? Abel is taken out, and Seth is given as his replacement. And we see this constant all throughout Scripture. God makes a move, Satan tries to counter it, but God is always going to have the victory. And so anti-Semitism at its core is a spiritual problem. Satan is going to do all he can to thwart God's plans. And this promised Redeemer, this promised Messiah, if you remember, is going to come through Eve. And so we have Seth. Eventually it's going to come through Shem. That's where we get the term Shemites or Semites. To be Semitic is to be a descendant of Shem, one of Noah's sons. Eventually they will come through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, and then the 12 tribes of Israel, particularly Judah, as it concerns the Messiah. I love this. This is from Arnold Fruchtenbaum's book, Israelology. He says, Satan's present and future war against the Jews is to thwart the second coming. It has been pointed out earlier that the basis of the second coming is Israel's national salvation, and Jesus will not come back until the Jewish people ask him to. So let's stop there. If you remember in Matthew, when Jesus is essentially, he's saying, okay, you've rejected me. And he says, he's weeping over Jerusalem. He's saying, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who stone the prophets and kill those who are sent to you. How often I would have gathered you as a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you were not willing. And he doesn't end there. What does he say? He says, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So there's this calling that the Jewish people in the end times will ultimately issue for the Messiah to return. And that's what Fruchtenbaum refers to here. If Satan, continuing with Fruchtenbaum, if Satan can never succeed in destroying the Jews before there is a national salvation, then Satan's career is eternally safe. For this reason, he has had a perpetual, unending war against the Jew. The biblical cause of anti-Semitism is Satan. God permits it, and the reason it is within his permissive will is Israel's sins. Nevertheless, Satan is the cause, and the Gentile nations are the means he uses. So ultimately, anti-Semitism is rebellion against God. It is satanic in nature, and the Gentile nations are the pawns used to harm the Jewish people. And I will just make a point, if that interests you, kind of knowing this, knowing more about the conflict Satan has with God, I recommend this book. It's called What on Earth is God Doing? It's by Dr. Ronald Schauers, who is now with the Lord. But this is a book the Friends of Israel offers, and it's tremendously helpful. So I want to recommend that to you. So let's consider anti-Semitism as a revolt against God. Israel's enemies, biblically speaking, are God's enemies. Consider Psalm 83, verses 2 through 3. the psalmist writes, "For behold, your enemies make a tumult, and those who hate you have lifted up their head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted together against your sheltered ones." So they are God's enemies. And how are they God's enemies? They're God's enemies because they attack his people. So when we understand anti-Semitism as a spiritual issue, as we just pointed out, we understand that it is part of Satan's conflict with God. And to engage in anti-Semitism is ultimately to engage in a sinful, we can even say satanic act. To attack Israel is to attack God. We also see this in Zechariah 2:8, where we read, "For behold, your enemies make a tumult." I'm sorry, that's not the correct one, but this is where God says, in fact, let me just read it to you so I don't misquote it. Zechariah 2:8. I wrote the wrong reference down in my notes here. Zechariah 2:8. "For thus says the Lord of hosts, after glory he has sent me against the nations which plunder you," speaking to Israel. "Why? For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye." That word, that phrase, apple of his eye, we have that in our own vocabulary today, but in Hebrew, it means the little man in God's eye. So it's the reflection in God's eye. When God, if you could look into God's eye, you would see the Jewish people. And so to attack Israel is to attack God. It is to poke God in the eye, if you will. I want to take you to the Abrahamic covenant. This is one of the foundational covenants of the Bible. It's eternal. God makes it with Abraham and passes it on to Isaac, Jacob, and the nation. Israel, as we'll see this, Israel's existence as a nation is dependent upon the I will of God. So if you have your Bibles, you might want to turn to Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. You're probably familiar with this passage, but God says to Abraham, "Go to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed." You've heard that before. Consider, though, all of the times God says, "I will," okay? "Go to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed." Israel, contrary to what even Israeli or Jewish scholars might think, who are more of a secular bent, Israel is not a nation that was formed by a bunch of disparate tribes that found some common ground by creating their own God and worshiping him. Quite the opposite, isn't it? How did it happen? The eternal God, in his sovereign plan, chooses to make one nation out of a pagan man named Abraham. And so Israel's entire existence is dependent on the I will of God. We don't have time to go there, but you might write down Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 35. This is the new covenant. But in this new covenant, Jeremiah says that, or God says to Jeremiah actually in this passage, that you would have to keep the stars and the moon and the sun from shining and keep the waves from roaring in order to destroy the Jewish people. It's not going to happen. And yet, persecution of Israel is part and parcel of their existence. And we see that in Genesis 12:3, right? It's anticipated. "And I will curse those who curse you." God knows cursing is going to happen. People are going to persecute the nation of Israel, but he is going to compensate. He will curse the nations that curse Israel. We also see that Messiah is going to come from Abraham. In Galatians 3:8, Paul quotes this passage from Genesis, and he refers to it as the gospel preached to Abraham beforehand. So he's saying this promise of all the nations of the world being blessed, I believe it means Apple iPhones and Levi jeans and the polio vaccine and all the many blessings we've received from the Jewish people. But Paul reminds us, ultimately, it is the gospel. It is the Messiah who is going to come from Abraham through the Jewish people. Well, then let's move on to anti-Semitism and the Exodus. So if you remember in Exodus chapter 1, we have the massacre of Jewish baby boys in Egypt. And sometimes we read over that and we think, oh yeah, I've read this before. This is part of the story. But this is anti-Semitism, isn't it? This is the government of Egypt turning its focus on the Jewish people. He's getting jealous at their growth. He's concerned as these Jewish people, they're living in Goshen, and he sees their numbers just keep growing and growing. And the Pharaoh who did not know Joseph says, this is not going to work. And so he targets the Jewish people and he says, we're going to massacre these Jewish babies. We also see in Exodus 14, the Egyptian annihilation attempt at the Red Sea. And again, in every instance, God counters what Satan's doing. So even though these Jewish baby boys are being massacred, he saves this one little boy named Moshe. Even though Egypt tries to destroy the Jewish people at the Red Sea, they come through. Egypt is destroyed. And that's a lesson for us as believers, to remember that God keeps his promises. We might think, oh, the Abrahamic covenant, that was thousands of years ago. Come on, things have changed, surely. Not with God. He has made a point. It is part of his character to keep his word. He is never going to go back on his word. And so we can look at history and we can see that God has indeed cursed those individuals and nations that have cursed the Jewish people. We'll look at that a little bit later. Renald Showers in his book writes, occasionally God and Satan do intervene directly in history, but more frequently they carry out their purposes through intermediate agents. They both prompt and use the actions of humans, nations, and angels for their own purposes. And we can't help but see this with Egypt and Babylon, the Assyrian captivity, the Persians, the Romans. Throughout history, it may seem that it is human agents who are doing all of this, but behind the scenes, orchestrating the anti-Semitism is Satan. Orchestrating their deliverance, the Jewish people's deliverance, is God. But I'm getting ahead of myself because that's next week's lesson. Well, let's look at the Mosaic covenant and anti-Semitism. So the Mosaic covenant is the covenant God makes with Moses. He makes it with the entire nation, but he verbalizes it to Moses at Sinai. And in Deuteronomy 28, if you have a pen, write Deuteronomy 28 down. I want to challenge you, when you have a moment, go read that chapter, because this is the history of the Jewish people in just a matter of a few verses. God here in Deuteronomy 28 says, essentially, Israel, if you obey the law of God, if you obey the revelation that I've given to you, it's going to be nothing but blessing. Your fields are going to be plentiful. Your harvests are going to be great. You're going to have children. Your enemies, when their armies come against you, they're going to be defeated. I will bless you. However, he also says disobedience is going to result in cursing. And in fact, in that chapter, if you just measure the number of verses, there's about this many blessings and a whole list of cursings. God is making sure it's very clear to his people, don't disobey this covenant. And he says that, well, let me read this to you. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 64 through 67. Then the Lord, he's talking, just to give context, he's saying, if you disobey, then the Lord will scatter you among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other. And there you shall serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone. And among those nations you shall find no rest, nor shall the sole of your foot have a resting place. But there the Lord will give you a trembling heart, failing eyes, and anguish of soul. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. You shall fear day and night and have no assurance of life. In the morning you shall say, oh, that it were evening, and at evening you shall say, oh, that it were morning, because of the fear which terrifies your heart, and because of the sight which your eyes see. So God foretells dispersion and persecution. This is going to be the lot of the Jewish people if they disobey his law. And if you know anything about Jewish history, you know, first of all, biblically speaking, they did transgress that covenant, and God was true to his word and is true to his word. And he has allowed persecution to happen to his people. Now, we have to remember, this is not punishment. This is chastening. Whom the Lord loves, he chastens. This is his chosen nation. And so if you read chapters 29 and 30 of Deuteronomy, you see that the purpose of this cursing and the persecution that's going to happen throughout the diaspora, throughout the dispersion of the Jewish people throughout the world, is ultimately Israel's repentance, and they will be brought back to the land. Now, historically, we know of at least three what we would classify as dispersions of the Jewish people. We have the Assyrian, we have the Babylonian, and then ultimately we had the Roman. The Assyrian and Babylonian were more captivities. The Roman was the final dispersion, which happened roughly from 70 AD to about 163, 65 AD. And so the Jewish people are going to be scattered throughout the world. And so a few years ago, I was at a Holocaust museum in Detroit, Michigan. And at the end of our tour, we met with a Holocaust survivor. She was not a believer. She I don't think, knew her Bible, but she told us something. And it was almost a direct quote from Deuteronomy 28, verse 67. She was telling us her story of living in the Pale of Settlement, an area that's actually in the news a lot right now with the Ukrainian and Russian conflict. She said it was horrible. She said we never knew if we were going to live to see the next day. She said we'd wake up and hope that, oh God, please get us through to the night. And at night, she would say, we would just say, Lord, please get us through to the day, to the morning. This is exactly what God said was going to happen. Now, Mark Twain is an interesting figure, not a believer, certainly not an Orthodox Christian, but he made a statement. And you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit. I want to say a couple of other things. In regard to the dispersion, so the Assyrian captivity was in 722 BC. The Babylonian captivity was a long process from about 607 BC to 586 BC. The Roman dispersion in 70. And we have to remember that God was sovereign over these things. Satan certainly would have meant them for evil, and he did. If you look at, for example, the Babylonian captivity, eventually the Persians become in control. That's where we learn about Esther and Haman. Haman meant for the destruction of the Jewish people. So Satan used these dispersions and these captivities to try to annihilate the Jewish people. But God's purpose is not to allow them to be destroyed. It's to chasten them. But he's always going to keep his promises to Abraham that he's going to curse those who curse his people and bless those who bless him. So consider Assyria. In 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 25 through 26, God says, he's speaking here, he says, and they, Israel, were unfaithful to the God of their fathers and played the harlot after the gods of the peoples of the land whom God had destroyed before them. So what does God do? Verse 26, so the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, that is Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and he carried the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh into captivity. So God says, all right, my people are playing the harlot with these other gods. I'm going to chasten them. How am I going to do it? I'm going to send this nation to Syria, this fierce nation, to take them captive. But in Isaiah chapter 10, God curses Assyria for their cursing of Israel. He says, woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger and the staff in whose hand is my indignation. He says, Assyria, you were my tool for chastening my people, but now woe to you. Whenever you see a woe in the scriptures, it means judgment. woe to you. And he then goes on to judge them. He says, I'm going to send someone who is going to punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his haughty looks. So God chastens Israel with a nation, and when Israel repents, then God turns and he punishes, disciplines, and usually annihilates the nation that has dared lift their finger against his people. We see the same thing in Babylon. Isaiah 47 talks about this, that God sent his people into Babylon, into the captivity, and yet Babylon was so harsh with Israel. And so following their repentance, what does God do? He comes in and he curses them. But God will not allow them to be destroyed. And this brings us to Mark Twain. So again, not an evangelical Christian by any means, not a believer, but he was a Philo-Semite. He was a lover of the Jewish people, and he appreciated the Jewish people. And he writes this back in September of 1897. He's speaking of the Jew. He says, he has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now and have vanished. The Jew saw them all, survived them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass away, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? You know, that's a good question. It's a question that we should actually use when we're talking to Jewish people and with anyone. I believe it was King Louis, one of the King Louis, I think the 14th, and he asked Blaise Pascal, how do you know the Bible is true? And what was Pascal's answer? The Jews, Your Majesty, the Jews. You cannot explain the survival of the Jewish people without God, which Twain tried to do. What's the secret of his immortality? Well, it's the eternal God and his eternal covenants that he's made with the Jewish people. Well, I want to turn now to not so much anti-Semitism described in the scriptures, but alleged anti-Semitism, specifically in the New Testament. I want to bring a couple of, or a few passages that people sometimes use to, Jewish people especially, they'll say, hey, that sounds really anti-Semitic. That sounds very anti-Jewish. Unfortunately, we also see this within the church, where evangelical Christians especially will take passages like the ones we're going to look at, and then they say, see, God hates the Jewish people. God's done with the Jewish people. I just the other day saw on Facebook, I follow Albert Mohler. He's the president of the Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. I follow him on Facebook, and he made a very strong statement. He's not a dispensationalist, but he made a very strong statement in support of the Jewish people. And he essentially said, as Christians, we should be the best friend the Jewish people have. And in the comment section, I was hoping I would see Christians saying, amen, brother, we need to support the Jewish people. And it was quite the opposite. Nearly all of the comments were from people who were professed evangelicals, and they were quoting scripture passages to show that God is done with the Jewish people. And here are some of the passages. First of all, Matthew 23, verses 31 through 33. Here, Jesus refers to the Pharisees and the scribes as, you serpents, you brood of vipers. Now, we have to remember this was an in-house conflict. And part of our problem often is that we forget that Jesus is Jewish. And a lot of times our Jewish friends forget Jesus is Jewish. So Jesus is talking to fellow Jews. He's talking to the religious leaders of Israel. And he's saying, you are a serpent, you're a brood of vipers. You are leading the nation astray. So this is not Jesus condemning all Jewish people everywhere, as some would like us to think. He is addressing fellow Jews, specifically a corrupt leadership of Israel. Another passage that often comes up is Matthew 27:25, where the Jewish leadership say, when Jesus, they're given the choice between Jesus and Barabbas. They say, his blood shall be on us and our children. And so some people, even within our own circle of believers, they would say, look, the Jewish people are guilty of the death of Jesus. They're Christ killers. That's been the refrain that the Jewish people have heard throughout the ages. And frankly, I think it's one of the greatest obstacles to the gospel with many of our Jewish friends, that they have been called Christ killers. Well, you're guilty of killing God. It's called deicide. Well, if you look at that passage in context, you'll see it applies to those speaking and their children. We wouldn't say it applies to all Jewish people everywhere, because a group of Jewish people said, may his blood be on us and our children. In fact, if that's the case, then all Gentiles are condemned too, right? Because who was it who drove in the nails into Jesus' hands and into his feet and who pierced his side? It was Gentiles, Romans specifically. There's some other passages there. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each one, but they're included in your notes as well. And there's some explanations as to why these things are not anti-Semitic. But you may encounter this in the church, or if you're talking to Jewish people and they say, I've always heard the New Testament is anti-Semitic. What about these passages? Well, it's very important to understand them and to be able to discuss them. There was also some alleged anti-Semitism in Paul's writings, especially. Just a couple of those passages. One is in 1 Thessalonians 2:14-16, where he says, he's speaking to the Thessalonian believers, and he says, for you also endured the same sufferings at the hands of your own countrymen, even as they did from the Jews, who both killed the Lord Jesus and the prophets and drove us out. Well, when this is used, in fact, this was used on this comment thread that I saw on Al Mohler's page. This was quoted, and if you look at that in context, Paul is Jewish. Paul devotes 3 chapters of the book of Romans to talking about God's love for the Jewish people and his program for the Jewish people. So to say that this is an anti-Semitic passage just doesn't hold any water. He's in the scriptures, usually when you see the term in the New Testament, especially the Jews, it's referring to the Jewish leadership who persecuted, who ultimately gave Jesus up for crucifixion to the Romans. But it is not a blanket statement that all Jewish people everywhere have done this. So there's a note in your notes, there's a note on that passage. Another one that we need to remember is that Paul actually condemns anti-Semitism. In Romans 11, he devotes this entire space to talking about how the Jewish people have not been cast aside by God. They're beloved by God. And he warns the Gentiles. In fact, he gives the illustration of how the Jewish people are the natural branches and the olive tree of the Abrahamic covenant. And he says in verse 19 of chapter 11, he says, you will say then branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. But just before that actually says, do not boast against the branches. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. He reminds Gentiles, you don't have any room to be anti-Semitic. You are the wild olive branches that were grafted in unnaturally. Don't boast against the natural branches. In fact, he says, if the Jewish people could be taken off temporarily, certain Jewish branches, if you will, of this tree could be broken off, I can do the same to Gentiles. So let's not boast about that. Well, having looked at that, just a few more things we want to address. And unfortunately, we're beginning to run out of time. But I wanted to address anti-Semitism in the last days. There is some alleged anti-Semitism in Revelation, Revelation 2:9 and Revelation 3:9, where there's references to the synagogue of Satan. In fact, if you listen to any ultra right-wing white nationalists or the skinheads, some of them will quote scripture and they'll refer to the Jewish people as the synagogue of Satan. Well, if you look at those again in context, it doesn't quite hold up. And there's a note in your set of notes, you can read about that. But I want to specifically tonight, as we're talking about anti-Semitism in the last days, to consider a passage that we cannot afford to miss. And this is Daniel chapter 9. It's just 4 verses, 9:24 through 27, but it's pivotal to understanding biblical prophecy. This is called the 70 weeks of Daniel, or the 77s of Daniel. And in this passage, God reveals to Daniel that there have been 77s decreed for the following purposes. And this term 7, we believe, refers to years, 77s. And what are the purposes? It is to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. There's some excellent commentaries that analyze this passage. It's rich. I wish we had the time to look at it. But in this passage, God reveals to Daniel that there are 69 sevens from the decree to rebuild the temple to the time of Messiah, the Prince. 1 7 then will be from the Antichrist to the Messiah's return. And if this is confusing, I don't want it to be, but look at this chart. I think this is included in your notes, but this might help. So we have 7 weeks of years, it's 49, and then another 62 weeks of years, 434 years. Altogether, this makes up 69 years, or 483 years. We then have this gap called the church age. That's where you and I live right now. And then there's what's called this Daniel's 70th week, this 1 7-year period that has yet to come to pass. Antichrist during this period is going to make a 7-year agreement with Israel for her safety, but he's going to break it halfway through. And when he breaks it, he will stop the sacrifices that Israel has been offering in their new temple, and he will set up what scripture refers to as the abomination of desolation in the temple complex. It's going to be the worship of himself. Ultimately, it's satanic. And this will usher in a time of unparalleled anti-Semitism, ultimately motivated by Satan, at the time that the prophet Jeremiah termed the time of Jacob's trouble. He refers to that in Jeremiah chapter 30. Jesus warns the Jewish people of this time in the book of Matthew. He says, he warns the Jewish people that when they see the abomination of desolation set up in the temple, that's their cue. He says, flee Jerusalem. And he says the reason for this command is that at this point, worldwide anti-Semitism is going to break out. They're going to be persecuted. He says, you have pity on nursing women, and hopefully your flight is not in the winter, because this is going to be awful. You're going to have to flee the Antichrist and his armies. I love what Dr. Schauer says about this. He says, since Israel's repentance will be a major key to the establishment of God's theocratic kingdom, which, by the way, comes at the end of this tribulation period, Satan will continue to attempt annihilation of Israel during the 70th week, the 7-year period. Realizing that his time is growing short, he will attack the nation with extreme intensity. We see this in Revelation 12. Antichrist will persecute the Jewish people more severely than they have ever been persecuted. Anti-Semitism will be the worst in history. For this reason, Jeremiah referred to this period as the time of Jacob's trouble. And at the end of the 70th week, Satan will draw all the armies of the world to Israel, to the place of Armageddon. This will threaten the existence of Israel, but God will continue to preserve at least a remnant. So consider, throughout the history of Israel's dispersion, they have always had another nation to turn to. So they flee the Middle East, where they were after the dispersion. They go up into Europe, some into Africa, some into other parts of the Middle East. There were certain places in Europe where anti-Semitism sprung up, and ultimately one of the safe havens for the Jewish people was Poland, which, if you know anything about the history of World War II and of the Holocaust, this is where they had the highest concentration of Jewish people. It's also where the highest percentage of Jewish people were killed. But there was always a nation they could turn to. During the Holocaust, many Jewish people tried to flee to Europe and to to England and to the United States. But at this time in history, during this tribulation time, this time of Jacob's trouble, the nations of the world will turn against Israel. Personally, I don't believe there's going to be a United States that's going to be friendly to the Jewish people. We find it pretty clear that the Jewish people have their back up against the wall. There's nobody coming to their aid except for some righteous Gentiles, some believers living during that time who try to help individual Jews. But the nations are going to be allied against the Jewish people. And this ultimately will culminate in Israel's calling for the Messiah to return. And the remnant that's left after all of this persecution and bloodshed will call upon the name of the Lord and be saved. And we see that in Zechariah chapter 14. We also see this global anti-Semitism in Revelation 12. And I'll just read this passage to you. Not the whole thing, but actually verse 12 of Revelation 12. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Now it says, then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. Now the Catholic Church has interpreted this to be Mary, that the 12 that she's giving birth to Jesus. Doesn't really hold up to exegesis there, but these 12 stars, or excuse me, it says, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God on his throne. Who is this? Who is this child? It is the Messiah, isn't it? And he is going to be the one who will rule all nations. But he ascends into heaven, and verse 6 says, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, and they should feed her there 1,260 days. And the rest of this passage goes on to picture this fiery serpent, Satan, persecuting the woman. We believe that woman is representative of Israel, of the Jewish people in the final days. They will be persecuted. I'm skipping some of the notes just for the sake of time. I hope you'll go through these. But as I said, due to the anti-Semitism that's going to take place in this time of Jacob's trouble, the nation will ultimately cry out for the Messiah to deliver them. And we see this in multiple passages, Psalms 118:26, Matthew 23:39. And what will be the result? It will be Israel's national salvation, Romans 11:26. Well, let's close then with one other portion. We've covered the end times. Now let's consider the kingdom. The kingdom is what we are looking for, what we're waiting for. Jesus finally establishes the kingdom on earth. Well, prior to entrance into the kingdom, those Gentiles living, following the tribulation, will be judged at what we will call the judgment of the nations, or the judgment of the sheep and goats, found in Matthew 25. What is the basis of this judgment? How is Jesus going to judge these Gentiles? Well, in Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46, we see that the basis is the treatment of the Jewish remnant during the tribulation. This passage is often used for certain social causes within the church, and the heart is good. But in context, we have to understand that this passage is speaking of the Jewish people. And this is where Jesus says to the Gentiles, he says, when I was hungry, you clothed me, or you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was naked, or when I was in prison and sick, you visited me. And he says that, and he also says to some other believers, when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me something to drink. When I was sick, you didn't visit me. And both of these groups of people are going to say, when did we see you, Jesus? And what does he say? He says, when you did it unto the least of these, my brethren, you did it or you did not do it unto me. And he's going to, as Stanley Toussaint, a scholar, says, the criterion for this judgment is the treatment of the Jewish people in the tribulation. Those among the Gentiles that respond to the message of the gospel indicate the genuineness of the response by their treatment of the messengers. There's going to be Jewish evangelists, at least 144,000 of them in the last days. Passiveness and even belligerence toward the Jewish proclaimers of the kingdom is the attitude of those who have no heart for the kingdom. None will have any excuse, since the gospel will have been proclaimed to all. So, entrance into the kingdom, what's evidence of a person's faith following the tribulation? It is the treatment of the Jewish people. So Jesus takes anti-Semitism very, very seriously. Anti-Semitism, interestingly, will not exist in the kingdom itself. To the contrary, the Jewish people will be honored and revered for being the chosen people. And instead of being scorned, the Jewish people will be associated with blessing. In fact, in Zechariah 8, it says that 10 men from every nation will grab the sleeve of a Jewish man, saying, let us go with you, for we know the Lord is with you. So they are finally going to be what they should have been since the time of Abraham. They're to be this blessed nation that is revered by the nations, by the Gentiles. So in conclusion here, we have to remember ultimately anti-Semitism is a spiritual issue. It's not simply a political thing. It's not just, or it's not a racial thing. It is ultimately spiritual in nature. It's a manifestation of Satan's conflict with God. Charles Feinberg says this, and I love this. What then is the true and only cause of anti-Semitism? In a word, Satan. Satan hates the nation through whom has come so much blessing to the world, especially the Savior. Moreover, and this is very important for us to remember, church, moreover, when Satan is angry against Israel, it always culminates in defiance against the Lord Jesus Christ. The two are inseparable. So Satan does not want the establishment of the kingdom, does he? He does not want God to fulfill the covenants that he has made with the Jewish people. Satan knows his Bible, which should motivate us to know it. And yet he continues to assault God's program and his chosen people. And so with that in mind, what can we expect as that final day draws near? As we see world events right now in Ukraine and in other parts of the world seeming to begin to line up with that end times scenario, what can we expect? Well, we can expect to witness increased anti-Semitism, because Satan knows his time is short. He knows the return of Christ is near. And so we can expect to see this. And so finally, what should our response be as Christians? Well, it should not be, as Paul said, boasting. It should not be anti-Semitism. It should not be a looking down on the Jewish people. To the contrary, we must understand that there is more happening than meets the eye. Satan seeks the destruction of the Jewish people as part of his conflict with God, and the world system which he rules views the Jewish people as an enemy. So what should our response be? We ought to be the very best friend the Jewish people have ever known. And it's important, by the way, I'll just close with this. It's important for us to ask ourselves this, and we'll go over this later as well. We want all people, Jewish people, Gentile people, we want them all to come to saving faith in the Messiah. Do we not? However, if our love for the Jewish people, if our support for the Jewish people is contingent on their believing the gospel, we're going to fall into, first of all, we're going to be very disappointed, because many Jewish people will not trust in Jesus. We know that biblically. And so we have to ask ourselves, if my Jewish friend, if the nation of Israel, the people I know who are Jewish or Israeli, if they never believe the gospel, will I still be the best friend they've ever had? If your answer is yes, then you have the heart for Israel that God has for them, because he's long suffering, isn't he? If you don't, read Romans 9-11 and allow God to change your heart. Well, that is a whirlwind. I gave you a lot, looking at the biblical conflict that Satan has with God. Interestingly, we don't say God's conflict with Satan. He's not at all at conflict with anyone. He's going to be the victor, but Satan has a conflict with God. Well, I want to open it up to questions now. I'm looking at the chat section here. Okay, let's see here. Scan up. So Betsy says, isn't Hebrews a correct term used in Egypt for a long time? Later Jew was used after the 12 tribes came into the promised land. Yeah, so when you read the Torah, you read Genesis through Numbers, you're not going to find the term Jew. What you do find the term Hebrew. Interestingly, one of the first times you see that is there's actually some question as to whether or not it was anti-Semitic. It was used in an anti-Semitic way, because it actually happened with Joseph. If you remember, Potiphar's wife accuses Joseph. And what does she say? She doesn't say, essentially, this man tried to rape me. What does she say? This Hebrew did this to me. I was talking to a rabbi about it a while back, and he said, yeah, I think there's evidence that that may have been an anti-Semitic statement. But yes, you see Hebrew used for most of the scriptures. In the book of Esther, you see the term Jew. The term Jew, first of all, I don't use that. I don't refer to the Jewish people as Jews. It just sounds bad on my tongue to a lot of Jewish people. But the term Jew comes from Judah. It refers to the people of Judah. And obviously today, the Jewish people are not only the people from the tribe of Judah, they're from 12 tribes, and God will reconstitute them. He knows who they are in the last days. So there are the 12 tribes, but it's used to refer to all descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are referred to, are Jewish people. So good observation, Betsy. Yes, Elizabeth points out it was first used in the book of Esther. Sylvia says the chart is not in the notes. I'm sorry, I will try to get that to you. It's not a chart that I made. It's a chart I got from another resource. So I will make a note to get that to you. By the way, I saw a couple of people who said that they didn't know where the notes are. If you got an email today, the email with the link to this Zoom class, there's also a link to the notes. You can download them there. And it's really everything I said plus some. Let's see. Warren and Pam say, isn't teaching that 2/3 of the Jews will be killed during the tribulation in a time worse than the Holocaust considered anti-Semitic? I guess there might be Jewish people who would certainly not like that. I hate that. I hate that it's there. But Zechariah is a Jewish prophet, and he's saying this is what's going to happen to our people. So I guess some people might consider it anti-Semitic, but it's in the Jewish prophets, and unfortunately it's going to happen. It should be a motivator for us, by the way, to teach this to all people, Jews and Gentiles. Let's see. Esperanza says, so it's inappropriate or offensive to call a Jewish person a Jew. I can't speak obviously for every Jewish person, but generally yes. When the term Jew is just a term, right? It means, as I said, you're a descendant of the people of Judah. If that's all it meant in its sterile sense, no problem. But you have to consider how language has, or how people have used that term throughout the centuries. So if you read Martin Luther, he wrote quite a bit on the Jewish people, but he wrote a book, and we're going to look at this little tract called On the Jews and Their Lies. Think about a Jewish person reading that. And when Luther is constantly saying, and the Jews did this, and the Jews did this, and the Jews should be their prayer books and their Talmud should be taken from them, and their synagogue should be burned down. The Jews, the Jews, the Jews. When you have centuries of that kind of usage on the lips of Christians, and I say Christians with air quotes, it sounds pretty bad to a lot of Jewish people. Now, I have Jewish friends, actually out here in Las Vegas. Most of my friends are Jewish. If I said, I was reading about the history of the Jews, are they going to, turn over the table and be mad at me? No, they're not. But I try to be as inoffensive as possible. The gospel is offensive enough. How can I be less offensive? I say Jewish people as much as I can. So, any other questions? Feel free to leave if you need to, but I'm going to stay on for a while to take questions or just to chat with you. But I want to thank you for coming to the class tonight. We are going to, as I said, next week be looking at the holiday of Purim. And we're going to be looking at each chapter, doing a quick synopsis of each chapter of Purim. We'll be looking at how it plays into exactly what we're talking about with Satan's conflict with God, and how it's God's answer to anti-Semitism. And then we're going to end, hopefully you'll find it fun, we're going to end by looking at how do the Jewish people celebrate Purim today. I'll give you a hint. It's rowdy, it's loud, it involves alcohol and lots of sugar. So come next week and I'll tell you all about it. So if you have to leave, thank you for coming. But if you want to stay on and you can unmute yourself and just ask a question or put something in the chat box, happy to talk with you. I'll see you next week.
What is your question?
Stay on. I'd like to ask him if he has a church out there.
Okay, you're on.
I hear someone speaking.
Do you have a
Someone
church?
have a question?
Do you pastor a church out in Las Vegas?
I do not. We attend a church. It's actually a church plant of Grace Community with John MacArthur out in California. That's where we've attended for the last year or so. But with our work, it's a little funny because obviously we love church planting, but based on the book of Galatians, we don't plant Jewish only churches. And so what we try to do is if Jewish people come to know the Lord, we try to get them plugged into existing good local bodies. Now in Israel, it's a completely different story. We have church planners there, but no, I don't pastor a church.
Hi, there was a great question that came in from Catherine Hutchins. She said, "The gospel is offensive?" Question mark.
Believe it or not. Yeah, it kind of offends our sensibilities when we're told that we're sinners. I was just talking to a lady last week, a Jewish lady, and she attends a Bible study that a colleague of mine here in Las Vegas teaches. And I said, her name is Barbara. I said, "Barbara, what are you learning at Bible study? How do you like it?" She said, "Oh, I love the Bible study. I love learning about things." She said, "The other day I learned Jesus was Jewish. I never knew that." And then she said, "But there's one thing I wish," my colleague's name is Jonathan. She said, "There's one thing I wish Jonathan would stop talking about." I said, "What's that?" She said, This sin stuff, it just bothers me. Everything's about how we're sinners." And she said, "I'm a good person." And I said, I don't like that part of the Bible either. It hurts. It steps on my toes. But Barbara, I said, it's true. It's all through the Bible, the Jewish scriptures, the New Testament. We're all sinners, and that's exactly why the Messiah came. And she said, "I guess you're right. I wish we could avoid that topic." But yeah, Chris, the gospel is indeed offensive. Okay, I see David says, "During the 3 weeks, will you be touching on how Jewish people can witness to other Jewish people?" Not really, not in this class. We taught a class on Jewish culture and customs and a class on Jewish evangelism a while ago. But you're welcome to email me if you'd like. I'd be happy to talk with you about that. And I think if you don't have my email, it's tperry@foi for friendsofisrael.org. I'd be happy to give you some
Ty,
tips on that.
can I make a shameless plug too, Ty,
Sure.
for David? That Lorna's class, The Search, is going to be she's a Jewish believer, and she's going to share on lessons on how to share your faith. So David, if you go to foiequip.org, you can register for that class in June. And that will be coming up soon.
Yes, you will not want to miss that. Lorna's book is it's fantastic. It's my wife's, I think my wife's favorite book. And Lorna is such a wonderful person. So you want to do that. Any other questions?
Ty, there's one here from Bernice, a great one. She wrote, I wonder if God is allowing the rise of anti-Semitism to speed the gathering of the Jewish people to their own land, as the prophets always said.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We're hearing reports out of Ukraine of Jewish people fleeing to Israel, and it's not because, I mean, part of it is because of the Ukrainian crisis, but also when you look at the history of world events, whenever there is a tumultuous time in world history, you know who gets blamed? The Jewish people, and persecution ensues. So I think that's exactly right. I think we are seeing mass numbers of Jewish people making aliyah, going up to Israel, going back. And I do believe that's part of that regathering process. I think it probably started in the 1880s, and it just gets ramped up throughout the last 160 years or so. Yeah.
Well, what a blessing to have a country to go to, their own country, their own people.
Exactly. It's almost like God
before
planned it.
1948.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. I just read an article yesterday in the Detroit Jewish News. A man was talking about how he is proud to be an American, loves being an American, but he holds on to his Israeli passport because he knows that anti-Semitism is it's taking place in this country as well. And if you know the history of especially the Holocaust, Germany was supposed to be a safe haven for enlightened Europe, a safe haven for the Jewish people. And it turned out to be a source of incredible suffering for them. So yes, I'm so thankful they have a land to go to.
Well,
Yeah,
when
Ty,
I
60% of hate crimes in America are committed toward the Jewish people. So if you put that in your mind, 60%, that's more than any other group, minority, whatever in America. 60% of hate crimes are committed toward Jewish people. And it doesn't get talked about that much, but that's an FBI report from 2020. So very recent.
Well, when I went to Israel, they asked me, did I want my passport stamped with an Israeli stamp? I had my choice, because you can't go to Egypt or someplace, other countries, if you have any Israel stamp in there. I said, I want my passport stamped.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
Proud to be going there.
When did you go, Jan?
1999 and 2010.
Okay. I know I've been recently, and they don't even give you the option. They give you a little piece of paper that you put in your passport.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, things change so quickly.
1999, I had mine stamped.
Good for you. That's going to be a keepsake, I'm sure.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So do you have a church in Las Vegas then for Jewish Christians?
No, we don't have churches uniquely for Jewish people. And part of that is there's a movement called the Messianic Judaism movement. We have the brothers and sisters in that movement, but we at Friends of Israel don't hold to that position simply because the church is to be made up of Jews and Gentiles. We're not supposed to have a Jewish church and a Gentile church. We try to get Jewish people, if they are believers in Jesus, get them plugged into a local church right alongside Gentiles. In fact, at my church, we have a Jewish man who's very active there. And so no, we don't do Jewish centric church planning or anything like that, but we do try to find good, solid local churches where we can plug Jewish believers into. Grant says, I heard the leader in Ukraine is Jewish. You are right. President Zelensky is a remarkable man, I believe, from my opinion, just in what he's doing to lead his nation. Right. But if you look at his history, it's incredible. His grandfather survived the Holocaust. Ukraine has been one of the most anti-Semitic countries in modern history. If you look at Holocaust history, Babi Yar, a lot of the tragedies of the Holocaust started in Ukraine. And yet now, who is leading the charge against Russia? It's the Jewish grandson of Holocaust survivors. And I think God has a sense of humor. I love that.
Hi,
Anything else?
this is Betsy.
Hi, Betsy.
Yeah, I'm about 4 hours west of you, and I was noticing your window, the daylight is getting dusk there. So anyhow, years ago, I met up with somebody at a church event that was going to do ministry to Jewish people in the Las Vegas area. Are there a number of them there? And what attracted Las Vegas to so many Jewish people to Las Vegas? What's there for them, especially since it's nicknamed Sin City?
Right. Yes. So there are approximately 80,000 Jewish people living in Las Vegas in the Valley. There's another city here, Henderson. It all kind of goes together, about 80,000. Why? Well, historically, it started with a lot of Jewish people. Las Vegas is a pretty young city, founded in about 1905. But it was in the 20s and 30s when it began to grow, and it was because of the mob. And so the mob, a lot of the mobsters were Italian Catholics and non-observant Jews who had to flee New York and Detroit and Chicago and the whole syndicate, and came out to Las Vegas, to this little desert town. And their descendants really helped to start Las Vegas, or they did, and so did their descendants. So that's historically how it began. In fact, Bugsy Siegel was one of the men who founded the largest synagogue in Las Vegas. It's still going on. And if you look at some of the pictures in the synagogue, you'll see there's Bugsy and some other mobsters. Now, today, most people in the town don't have anything to do with the mob, but until those Californians started entering our fair state, it was a pretty inexpensive place to live and to do business. And so a lot of Jewish businessmen and women moved their businesses here. It's also a good place to retire. So a lot of retirees, Jewish retirees, come here. It's also very, I don't know this as that this is part of the factor, or a factor for Jewish people, but it's very similar in climate to parts of Israel, particularly the south. And so we have about 10,000 Israeli Americans living here as well. So that may be part of it. But yeah, it's had a Jewish presence almost since its founding as a city. Good question.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah. I'm here in the Antelope Valley because I know the I-15 is the main corridor out of Southern California. And I've heard the Antelope Valley area from people that have been in the Middle East have said this area is similar to Israel.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure that has to be a draw for some people. It feels a lot like home. So I'm from Michigan. It doesn't feel anything like home here. We don't have any lakes or anything like that. So
thank you. This was a great presentation. I'm looking forward to the next two.
Thank you, Betsy. Look forward to having you back. Anyone else? All right. Well, then we'll call it a night, but thank you for coming, and be sure to come next week and bring a friend. Same time, same place. See everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.